In Britain, the Vulcan Motor Company was proud to film the way their workers assembled cars, slowly and carefully by hand. Craftsmen worked in their own way, at their own pace. The whole process took several weeks from start to finish. These handmade cars were so expensive that a wide gulf separated those who built them from those who bought them. But the days when cars were just luxuries for the rich were drawing to a close. In 1908, one man's vision would change manufacturing and create a new market. Henry Ford set out to make the simplest car ever. A car for rural America, a 20th century equivalent of the horse and buggy. To produce the Model T cheaply, Ford knew he had to change the way cars were built. That meant changing the way his workers worked. As he reorganized his factory to turn out Model Ts, he was influenced by the efficiency expert Frederick Taylor. Taylor complained that hardly a workman can be found who doesn't devote his time to studying just how slowly he can work. And then he devoted his life to speeding them up. When Taylor was brought in, he first timed the workers with stopwatches and noted their every movement. In a famous experiment at an ironworks, he reorganized a worker named Schmidt. Previously, Schmidt had hand-carried 12 tons of pig iron a day up from a wagon. After Taylor rearranged things, the tolerant Mr. Schmidt found himself carrying 47 tons, and production had been raised 300%. Called into an office, Taylor helped the world's fastest typist type even faster. The new world record of 150 words a minute was achieved by Margaret Owen, and Taylor claimed much of the credit. At Ford's factory, Taylorism meant dividing automobile production into simple, repetitive steps. There would be no need for skilled craftsmen with years of apprenticeship. Men could learn to do any job quickly. A trained wheelwright no longer made each wheel in its entirety. Wheel making was broken down into almost 100 steps, done by different men at different machines. It was much faster, but workers could still complete only 200 cars a day. So in 1913, Ford introduced his most revolutionary change yet.
In those days, each car was built from the frame up on stationary wooden horses.
The Ford Motor Company filmed a reenactment of how Henry Ford first tried out his new idea.
Henry Ford watched it for a while, then he had an inspiration. Instead of moving the men past the cars, why not move the cars past the men? So on one hot August morning, they tried it that way. A husky young fellow put a rope over his shoulder, and Henry Ford called, "Let's go." And at that very moment, as the workmen began to fasten the parts onto the slowly moving car, the assembly line was born.
Soon assembly lines were up and running in Ford's factory. The lines became the key to mass production, a system that would remain virtually unchanged for most of the century. A network of clanging conveyors was used to deliver parts to an exact point on the line. The workers became an integral part of the great machine, and management set the pace, without discussion or negotiation, for unions were forbidden. The men faced new pressure as the final assembly line beat out the rhythm for the whole factory. There was no way they could stop or slow it down. Few stood the pace and din for long. Men tried it for a few weeks, then quit. But Ford had an answer. The company was making record profits. The time taken to build each car had dropped to 1.5 hours, so he could afford to raise pay. When he announced he was doubling wages to the unheard-of level of $5 a day, the factory was besieged with applicants. Other car makers adopted the Ford method. Ford's recipe, mass production, low costs, high wages, was creating not only cheap cars, but well-paid workers. Above all, it was the constant supply of new men arriving in Detroit that made it possible. The company set the terms. If they worked fast and obeyed orders, they got the wages. It was a game for which Ford made the rules simple but strict. High pay for hard work.
What Mr. Ford wanted from his workers was a good day's work on the shift. Go home, eat and go to bed, and you'll save your strength and get up and give them a good day the next day. That just pops in my mind, and it is the truth.
Ford's private security force, the Plant Protection Service, kept discipline. Anyone who recruited for the unions was fired. Company spies kept a lookout for those considered to be troublemakers. Workers on the Rouge lines had never had job security. Now those lucky enough still to have jobs became increasingly powerless.
You couldn't even talk to guys on the job, not to let the foreman see you. There were whispering going on and whatnot. A friend of mine was fired 3 times, a guy by the name of John Gallo, for smiling. If you went to the bathroom, you had to get permission from your supervisor. And if you was in there over 3 or 4 minutes, you would have one of the service guys, if you had to use the bathroom to relieve your bowels, he would come up and put his foot where you flush, and he says, stand up. And when you stand up, if there wasn't something in that toilet, out you go.